The tension inside Iran is getting worse. Outside, the pressure from the United States and others continues. In the midst of all this is the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important oil shipping lanes in the world. Even a small disruption here is immediately felt in the global economy. That's why every move in this region is not just a local issue, but has a global impact. As the situation intensifies, there are calls from different countries to keep the passage open and safe. For countries that rely on energy supply, this is not an option, but a necessity. And this is where greater pressure comes in. China and Russia both have an interest in the continuous flow of trade and energy. So for them, it's important to keep the route open. On the other hand, for Iran, the strait is not just a simple passageway. It's a source of strategic leverage, a card that can be used in a bigger geopolitical game. And as external pressure intensifies, the situation inside the country becomes even more complicated. At this point, the most important question is not just who holds the power, but who gets to decide where the country is headed. But before we start, don't forget to like this video. It means a lot to us content creators. Thank you very much, and now let's get started. In this kind of situation, there's another layer that often goes unnoticed. This is not just a battle of ideas or direction, but a battle over the ability to adapt to rapid change. Because as the crisis drags on, it's not just the leaders who need to make decisions. The entire system also needs to adapt. And this is where the situation becomes more complicated. Because the decisions being made now are not just for the present. They also become the basis for the next steps. How other countries will act, how the market will react, and how allies will adjust. This means that every move has a ripple effect, not just within the country, but throughout the entire region. And as this kind of pressure increases, consistency becomes even more important. Because when actions don't match the message, confusion arises. At this level, confusion poses risks to the economy, relations, and stability. So at this point, it's not just a question of what decision will be made, but also how it will be shown to others. Because in the world of international relations, it's not just actions that are observed, but also the signals they send. And this is where an important reality comes in. Perception carries as much weight as reality. How you are seen can affect how you are treated. And how you are treated has a direct effect on the outcome of every decision. As the situation deepens, one important thing emerges: uncertainty. In this kind of crisis, not all information is clear. There are things that are not immediately visible. There are decisions that are not immediately understood. And because of this, a gap forms between what is happening and how it is understood by the public and by other countries. That's where speculation comes in. And when speculation increases, the situation becomes even more unstable. Because it's not just facts that are in play, but also perception. And in geopolitics, perception has an effect. It can increase tension, it can lead to wrong decisions, and it can trigger actions that weren't planned in the beginning. So at this point, it's not just what happens that's important, but also how it's understood and how people react to it. Because with every reaction, there's a new move. And with every move, there's a new effect. It's like a continuous chain reaction. And as time goes on, it becomes harder to control. So for leaders, having a plan is not enough. They also need to think about how others will see and accept it. Because in situations like this, a single misinterpretation can cause a bigger problem than the action itself. There's another thing that becomes critical: consistency. Because when a country shows different signals at different times, it creates confusion. And at this level in international relations, confusion is not just a simple misunderstanding. It becomes a risk that can lead to misreading intentions. And when intentions are misread, the response can also be wrong. And with every wrong response, the possibility of escalation increases. So at this point, it's not just important what is being done, but also how it is shown and how others understand it. Because in the end, stability is not just based on action, but on how consistent and predictable it is in the eyes of others. And in this kind of setup, it becomes clearer that every small move, even if not immediately noticed, has the potential to create a bigger effect on the direction of the whole situation. And for now, it seems there is still no clear answer. In Masoud Pezeshkian's view, continuing in this direction comes with a clear price. This is not just a matter of geopolitics, but a matter of the country's very safety. For him, if the tension and conflict continue, Iran will not only face its enemies, but also its own downfall. His statement on April 20th was like a bomb dropped within the system. It was a direct reminder that the economy has its limits on what it can endure. If this doesn't stop, the country will face a massive reconstruction crisis with insufficient funds, an unstable market, and infrastructure that is gradually deteriorating. There are reports of damage in key sectors: steel, energy, and industrial production. There are areas where factory operations have been affected, and ports that are vital to trade are experiencing disruptions. At the same time, the currency continues to weaken. The value of the rial is dropping, and ordinary citizens feel this in their daily expenses. And here comes the most sensitive point. According to Pezeshkian, the truth must be told to the public, because if not, the remaining trust in the government will be lost. And once trust is gone, it's harder to restore than any infrastructure. But such a call was not accepted by everyone. For the hardliners, this kind of message seems like an admission of weakness. And in their view, this kind of approach could weaken the country's position abroad. That's why this leads to clashes. It's not just about ideas, but about the direction of the entire state. And Pezeshkian is not alone in this perspective. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf is also among those who are showing concern. According to some reports, there are intense discussions within the system, particularly on the issue of negotiations and dealing with the United States. Some say that dialogue is needed to avoid a bigger crisis. And there are others who believe that any compromise comes with a price of weakness. This is where the message that comes out becomes inconsistent. There are officials who have stated that routes for international shipping remain open, while there are actions that cause tension and confusion outside. And this is where the situation becomes even more complicated. It's not just about external pressure from other countries. This is an internal struggle. How to face the crisis and which direction the government will choose, diplomacy or maintaining a firm stance. And as this kind of clash drags on, it becomes clearer that the biggest challenge isn't just from the outside, it's also unity within the system itself. At the negotiation table, it's not just external discussions taking place. There's a quieter pressure coming from within the system itself. Leaders like Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Abbas Araghchi are not just talking to other countries, but they're also balancing different forces within Iran. And here, it's important to understand a subtle but critical point. The actions of Masoud Pezeshkian and Ghalibaf may seem like they're moving closer to what the public wants, but this isn't simply a change of principle. This isn't a sudden ideological shift. It looks more like an adaptation strategy. It's a way to maintain the system while adjusting it to the realities the country is facing. In other words, they're not trying to destroy the system. They're trying to preserve it by moving in a direction that's more acceptable to the people. It looks like it's for the people, but on a deeper level, it's for the survival of the state. And this is where the situation becomes interesting, because for the first time, the two directions overlap: what some parts of the government want and what many of the people want: less tension, more negotiation, and better economic conditions. But this doesn't mean that everything will be easy. In fact, this is the most delicate part, because whichever you choose, there will be consequences. If there is no agreement, the pressure on the economy continues, instability worsens, and public dissatisfaction intensifies. If there is an agreement, there is a possibility of opposition from the more hardline group, and that's where internal friction begins. Above all of this, there is a deeper question. Who truly has control over the direction of the system? At this point, a clear chain of command is important. When it becomes uncertain where the final decision is coming from, The tension inside increases even more. There are diplomatic talks. There is another force that remains active on the other side. Ahmad Vahidi is there, a longtime member of Iran's security establishment. He is not a new name in this system. He has long been connected to decisions related to security and regional operations. Because of this, he is often associated with a stronger and more aggressive perspective, and this is where a clear division emerges. There are leaders who believe that diplomacy is the way to avoid a bigger crisis, while others believe that maintaining a strong stance is important for deterrence and influence. And this is not just a simple difference of opinion. It affects the direction of the entire country. If high tensions continue, the role of security institutions becomes stronger. Their influence on decision-making increases. But if diplomacy and de-escalation come into play, the balance of power changes. And this is where the situation becomes sensitive because each direction has its own benefits and its own risks. While some sectors of society are facing economic pressure, inflation, instability, and limited resources, the question of where the state should focus becomes even more important. Should it be on internal development or on maintaining regional influence and security posture? This debate continues. There are times when the messaging from different parts of the system is not aligned. There are statements that show openness to international engagement, and there are actions that show a firmer stance. When this happens, confusion arises not only outside but also within. And right now, that's what remains unclear. The actions of Masoud Pezeshkian and Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who have moved closer to the public's perspective. It's not just simply listening to the people, it's also a way to control anger before it completely erupts in the streets. In other words, it's not just for the people, but also to maintain the system using the people's support. The gap between what is being said and what the public is experiencing is growing. It's like the foundations of the system are slowly being eroded. Every inconsistency, every conflicting message is like a crack that keeps widening. And this is where one of Iran's most important points of leverage comes in, the Strait of Hormuz. For a long time, this has been one of the country's strongest strategic assets. But now, there are signs that this same leverage is also becoming a pressure point. When the flow of trade is affected, the country's income is directly hit. And when exports stop, it's not just a simple loss of revenue. It affects the entire chain in production, storage, and long-term capacity. Oil infrastructure can't just be stopped and started easily. When operations stop, the pressure inside the reservoir can drop. And in some cases, it can have a permanent effect on output. Even before tensions escalated, a large part of Iran's income came from oil exports. This is especially true for countries that rely on exports, like China, where supply can't adjust quickly. So any disruption in its flow has a direct effect on the economy. And while this is happening, it's not just Iran that's affected. The entire global market is sensitive to every development. There are signs of instability. While the physical supply is affected, the financial markets react quickly to every report or rumor. And this is where the situation becomes more complicated, because what's happening in the Strait isn't just a simple operational issue. It's a reflection of internal clashes over direction. There are statements that show openness to international passage, but there are also decisions that limit or control the flow. And this kind of pattern, opening up and then tightening restrictions, shows a system that is struggling to choose a single direction. Not fully engaging in conflict, but not fully engaging in dialogue either. Other countries see the uncertainty. And this is where another layer of pressure comes in, Iran's allies. They also have their own interests to protect. They're not just looking at politics, but also at the stability of supply, trade routes, and regional balance. This means that as pressure from the enemy increases, expectations from allies also rise. And in the midst of all this, it becomes even more of a test to see if the system can maintain control. As the situation worsens, it's not just Iran's enemies who are taking a stand. Even allies and major countries are starting to speak more directly. In a call between Xi Jinping and Mohammed bin Salman, China issued a clear message. The Strait of Hormuz must remain open to the normal passage of ships. This is not just for one country, but for the entire region and the global economy. According to a Bloomberg report, this is one of China's most direct statements about the situation in the strait. And it's important to note to whom this was said, not directly to Iran, but to Saudi Arabia. This means China is more focused on the stability of the Gulf region rather than just a single partnership. And this is where it gets more interesting, because for a long time, a large portion of Iran's oil exports has been going to China. So any disruption in the flow directly affects China's energy security. So the priority is clear: stability, predictable supply, and open trade routes. Even statements from the Chinese Foreign Ministry revolve around the same point. The strait must remain safe and open. Because for China, this is not just a political issue, but also an economic one and a matter of long-term strategy. This includes expanding the use of the yuan in international trade. And this won't happen if the region is not stable. On the other hand, Russia also has its own position. Sergei Lavrov called for maintaining the ceasefire and avoiding escalation. At the same time, they emphasized the importance of the free passage of ships, particularly for their own interests in trade and transport. In forums like the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, this kind of dual messaging emerges, avoiding tension, but at the same time protecting their own strategic interests. And here, the bigger picture becomes even clearer. This is not just a simple conflict between Iran and other countries. This is a more complicated network of interests where each country has its own agenda. China is focused on energy and trade stability. Russia is focused on strategic positioning and regional influence. And in the middle of all this is Iran, which has to navigate pressure from both sides. As calls for stability grow louder, Iran's position internally becomes even more difficult, because every decision has an impact not only on its own economy, but also on its relationships with its allies. Expectations from the outside are rising. The system's ability to make clear and consistent decisions is being tested even more. In the statements from Sergei Lavrov, there is one line that is important to note. We will accept any decision that suits the Iranian side. At first glance, it seems like full support for Iran. But if you look deeper, the meaning is more complicated. Because along with that statement, he also gave another message. Russia is ready to supply energy resources to countries affected by the crisis. This means that while they support Iran politically, they are also ready to fill any shortage in oil supply in the global market. And this is where the real dynamics become clear. This is not a simple alliance. This is a combination of cooperation and self-interest. While Iran is facing pressure, there are opportunities for other countries to strengthen their position in the energy market. And they will likely take advantage of this. China has a different approach. For China, the most important things are stability, energy security, and the continuous flow of trade. So the priority is clear: open routes, predictable supply, and avoiding escalation. This means that both China and Russia are calling for de-escalation, but not for the same reasons. Their interests are different. China is focused on long-term stability and economic flow. Russia, on the other hand, sees an opportunity to strengthen its own position in the energy market. And in the middle of this, Iran is facing increasing pressure, not just from its enemies, but also from countries it expects to support it. As the situation intensifies, it becomes clearer that Iran's decisions are no longer just an internal matter. Every move has an effect on its relations with major countries. There are calls to avoid escalation. The space for drastic measures is getting even smaller. In this setup, any choice of direction comes with consequences. If de-escalation is chosen, the dynamics within the system will change. On the other hand, if a stronger stance is chosen, the risk of isolation may increase. And here, the bigger picture becomes clearer. This is not just a simple government crisis. This is a much deeper struggle between different perspectives, different interests, and different directions for the future of the country. In the midst of it all, there is a vacuum at the top of the system. And when there is a lack of control, there are people who will naturally fill that void, not because they were chosen, but because they are in position. And now there are some key figures who are competing to shape the direction. Ahmad Vahidi, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and others who have long been part of the system. People who come from the same generation. They were together in the beginning. Now they have different directions. They both have history. They both have experience. And above all, they know each other. And when the setup is like this, it's not just ideology that clashes, but also personal dynamics. On the other side, Masoud Pezeshkian and Ghalibaf are gradually seeing the effects of the economic crisis. They see the pressure on the system. And more importantly, they see what the people are feeling. That's why they are leaning more towards the idea of diplomacy. They are more open to negotiation, not because their core belief has changed, but because they need to adjust to keep the system intact. But on the other side, there are groups that do not agree with this. For them, moving towards negotiation could weaken the country's position. And this is where the conflict over the country's direction comes in. Strategy versus tactics. Diplomacy versus deterrence. And while this is happening, it's not just the internal dynamics that are affected, but also the broader network of Iran's influence. For many decades, Iran has built a regional presence through various alliances and partnerships. But now, these are also facing pressure. There are changes in the balance of influence. There are external actions affecting their operations. And as time goes by, it becomes harder to maintain the previous level of influence. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz remains a factor, a symbol of strength, but now it is also becoming a symbol of dilemma. There are times when the route is opened, and there are times when it is tightened again. And this kind of pattern shows one thing. It's still unclear which direction will be chosen. It's not a full confrontation. It's also not full diplomacy. And as this situation continues, the biggest problem becomes clearer. It's not just pressure from the outside, but also the lack of a single clear direction within. And in the end, that's what will truly determine where the whole system and the people at the center of all this will go. They're not just acquaintances. Their connection goes way back. They come from the same system. They carry the same history. And now they are also the ones shaping the direction of the country. As the deadline set by Donald Trump approaches, the pressure is intensifying. Some diplomats are taking action. Efforts are being made to start talks. But even so, it's still unclear whether the next step will go ahead. Will Iran join the next round of talks? Or will they stay on the current path? And here, a deeper reality becomes clear. The fate of the country is not only decided at the negotiation table, but also within the system itself, among people with different views, different interests, and different directions. On one hand, there are leaders who see diplomacy as a way to avoid a bigger crisis. There are also those who believe that maintaining a strong stance is the key to power and influence. And while they can't agree, the tension continues. While China and Russia have their own interests to protect, the situation becomes even more complicated. Will they help stabilize Iran? Or will they take advantage of its weakness in the midst of all this? There are the citizens, the people directly affected by every decision, every delay, every escalation. And as time goes by, the question becomes more important. How long can they wait? How long can they endure the uncertainty? Because in the end, this is not just a fight between leaders or countries. This is a situation that has a real impact on millions of lives. And while there is still no clear direction, the most important question remains open. Will this end in an agreement or in a bigger crisis?